In this video, I'm going to go over some introductory information about the digestive system. The main point of the digestive system is to prepare food for use by the cells of the body. What we need out of our food are things called nutrients. There are 6 major nutrients: water, vitamins, minerals, and then the energy-yielding nutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids are the only nutrients that actually have to be broken down into smaller pieces. And that's because water, vitamin, and minerals are already in their smallest forms when we consume them. The digestive system is going to provide a means for many different processes, including ingestion. Ingestion is just a fancy name for eating or taking in food. And digestion. Digestion is the process of breaking food particles down into smaller, more absorbable pieces. There are 2 types of digestion that go on in the human body: mechanical and chemical. Mechanical digestion is what it sounds like, where we use mechanics or force to break things down into smaller pieces. An example of this is chewing, which is better known as mastication. Chemical digestion is going to use chemicals to break food nutrients down into smaller pieces. One of the most common ways we do this is to use chemicals called enzymes. Enzymes are made out of protein, and it's their job to speed up chemical reactions, specifically the chemical reactions we need to happen in order to break down our food. The digestive system also provides a mean for absorption. Absorption is the process of taking the nutrients out of our food and actually bringing those nutrients into the cells of the body, because only at that point has the nutrient actually really entered the body. Lastly, the digestive system will provide a means for egestion, which is the process of removing the unabsorbable waste products from the body. The digestive tract is the word we use to talk about all of the parts of the body that food will come into contact with. An old-fashioned term for this is alimentary canal. The digestive tract includes the mouth, pharynx, esophagus, and the gastrointestinal tract. The gastrointestinal tract is what it sounds like. Gastro means stomach. Intestinal means intestines. So the gastrointestinal tract is the stomach, the small intestines, and the large intestines. Part of the large intestine is called the colon, but there are other pieces to the large intestine, as we will learn about in another video. There are other organs that are important for the process of digestion, and we call these accessory organs. Some of these come into contact with food, like teeth and tongue, but other organs don't even ever contact our food, but we still need them for the processes of the digestive system. So this includes salivary glands, the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. All of these organs on this list are all going to be regulated in some way by the body. Regulation can occur by hormones or by the nervous system. Let's trace the path of food through the body. Of course, we'll start with the mouth or oral cavity, where ingestion occurs. From the oral cavity, the food is then pushed into the throat or pharynx. From there, the food will travel down the esophagus to the stomach. In order for food to get from the esophagus to the stomach, the food has to pass a muscular door called the lower esophageal sphincter. But once the food passes that sphincter, it is now in the stomach. From the stomach, the food needs to pass to the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum. In order to do so, the food has to pass another muscular door. This one is called the pyloric sphincter. Once the food is past the pyloric sphincter, it is now in the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. From there, the food will travel to the second and third parts of the small intestine, the jejunum and the ileum. From there, the food needs to enter into the large intestine. In order to do so, the food has to pass through another muscular door. This one's called the ileocecal valve. Once the food passes the ileocecal valve and enters into the large intestine, it is now in the first part of the large intestine called the cecum. From there, food will pass to the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, and sigmoidal colon. From there, the food will pass to the rectum and eventually to the anus for defecation. In order for defecation to occur, the feces has to pass both the internal and external anal sphincters. Many of the digestive organs have a serous membrane on the outside of them called the peritoneum. The peritoneum is a type of serous membrane, and we've talked about serous membranes in other parts of this class. A serous membrane always has two layers to it and a space. And the function of a serous membrane is to reduce friction. There's a lot of moving parts in the abdomen, so there is the potential for friction. As I said, every serous membrane has two layers and a space. The layer of the serous membrane right on top of the organ is called the visceral layer. The layer of the serous membrane that's further away is called the parietal layer. And the cavity with the fluid that reduces friction is between the two layers. In this case, we have the visceral peritoneum that's lying right on the outside of the organs, the peritoneal cavity with the peritoneal fluid inside of it, and then lining the walls of the abdominal cavity is where we will find the parietal peritoneum. The peritoneal cavity is the largest cavity in the human body. And because it's so big, we can actually do some things with it in the clinical setting. One example is using it to drain parts of the body that are building up fluid. So this is common, for example, around the brain. So sometimes people have too much fluid building up around their brain, and we can build a shunt, or basically a tube, which will drain that fluid into the peritoneal cavity. This is always safer than draining the fluid outside of the body, because whenever you go outside of the body, you're increasing a risk for infection. We can also use the peritoneal cavity for something called peritoneal dialysis. Dialysis is something that usually happens when someone's kidneys are failing. The job of the kidneys is to filter toxins out of blood. With peritoneal dialysis, rather than connecting someone's bloodstream up to an external machine, what we do is we put fresh saline into the peritoneal cavity. This is going to require a surgically implanted catheter in order to access the cavity though. But once the fresh saline is in the peritoneal cavity, it will allow for diffusion of toxins out of the blood into this toxin-free saline. After the process is complete, the saline, which is now full of toxins, is removed from the body. So what's nice about this is that this can be done at home, which won't require patients to go to a different location for the dialysis to occur. Before we leave the peritoneum, I wanted to talk about something called mesentery. Mesentery is basically super fatty folds of the visceral peritoneum. This is sort of like an apron of fat that's covering the abdominal organs. So if you were to cut into someone's abdomen for surgery, you'd have to cut through skin and then muscle, and then you would cut into the mesentery. The mesentery is very good at storing fat, unfortunately. And there have been studies that show that mesentery fat is actually worse for you than subcutaneous or skin fat. So mesentery fat actually increases our risk for things like cardiovascular complications and type 2 diabetes more so than subcutaneous fat. Mesentery fat is also called visceral fat. Maybe you've heard of the term that way too.